Solving equations, eliminating the coefficient and fractions. First thing we need here is some vocabulary. And the first word is the coefficient, the number in front of the variable. So when we write 3x, 3 is the coefficient. And you must know that 3x is 3 times x. And if I asked you to multiply 7 and x, what's 7 times x? You should say it's 7x. However, you did nothing because it's still 7 times x. You dropped the dot. If we say x, remember that there's a 1 in front of that x. That's 1x. And when I say 1 times 10 is 10, and 1 times x is x, those are all the same thing. And when we say negative x, that's really negative 1x, which again is negative 1 times x, which is how we get negative x. The coefficient is the number in front of the variable, and there's always multiplication between the coefficient and the variable. When we solve an equation, we get the variable by itself, and the way we do that is with the inverse operation. So we have to understand that there's multiplication between a coefficient and its variable, because the inverse operation is how I get rid of that coefficient. The inverse operation is the operation that undoes another operation. So for multiply, if I multiply by 2, to undo that, I divide by 2. The inverse of multiply is divide. The inverse of add, if I add 10, is to subtract 10. The inverse of add is subtract. And if I subtract 7, to undo that, I would add 7. So the inverse of add is subtract. The inverse of subtract is add. The inverse of divide is multiply. The inverse of multiply is divide. So the key idea as we solve equations is we're going to get the variable by itself. We're going to isolate it by using the inverse operation. Everything we do throughout this chapter is going to be to get the variable by itself. That means isolate it. And we're going to use the inverse operation to do that. For example, if we had 3x equals 18, we know that there's times between the 3 and the x, so we divide. The inverse of multiply is divide. I'll divide both sides by 3. 3 divided by 3 is 1, and remember that 1x is x, and 18 divided by 3 is 6. Now what that means is that if I plug in that 6 for x, that 3 times 6 is 18. When you solve an equation, that number should make the equation true. If we had 7x equals 28, let's make that a negative 7. Well, just like the previous example, there's times between the coefficient and the variable. To get rid of something that's multiplied, we divide. We'll divide both sides by negative 7. Anything divided by itself is 1. A negative divided by negative is a positive. And again, 1x is x. So x is 28 divided by negative 7, which is negative 4. If we have an equation that's negative x equals 25, remember, if there's no number there, there's always a 1. And in this case, it's a negative 1. And just like the previous two, there's going to be times there. To get rid of that multiply, we divide. We'll divide both sides by negative 1, and 25 divided by negative 1 is negative 25. Let's flip this around. If we had 42 equals 7x, I know there's times there. Now remember, even though that's flipped around, we're trying to get the variable by itself. What I have to get rid of is the 7. So I'm going to divide both sides by 7. The 7's cancel. 1x is x. And 42 divided by 7 is 6. Now it seems like fractions would be harder, but you'll see that it's just the inverse operation you use to get the variable by itself. We might have two steps depending on how we solve it. If we had 2/3 x equals 18, what I need to do is get rid of the fractions. I'm going to eliminate the fraction. And the way I do that is I multiply both sides by the common multiple of all my fractions. Well, for these first examples, we only have one fraction. Later we'll get into more fractions. But what I need to do is eliminate that 3 so that I don't have fractions. And the way we do that, that's division by 3, is we multiply by 3. We use the inverse operation. And when we multiply both sides by 3, remember that 3 is over 1. Anything divided by 1 is itself. And these 3's cancel because there's a 3 up top and a 3 below, and there's divide between them. And 3 divided by 3 is 1. So what I'm left with then is 2x. 2x equals 3 times 18, which is 54. And again, just like the previous examples, I got a coefficient of 2. So I'll divide both sides by 2, and 54 divided by 2 is 27. Well, how about this one? Let's say we had x over 7 equals 4. This is the same as the last one. It may not look like it, but it is. There's a 1 in front of that x, and in fact, that's really 1/7. But we can just multiply both sides by 7, because how do I get rid of division by 7? I multiply by 7. And what you do to one side, you have to do to the other. There's an equals between them. You got to balance it out. And the 7's cancel, and it's 1x, which is x, and x is 28. Let's throw in some negatives. If we had negative 5/9 x equal to 30, the first thing I'm going to do is get rid of the division by 9. So I'm going to multiply both sides by 9. The 9's will cancel, and I'm left with negative 5x equals 270. And then there's times, just like the previous examples. I'll divide by negative 5 to get the x by itself. And the 5's cancel, and I'll go to my calculator and punch in 270 divided by negative 5, and I get negative 54. If we had x over, let's make it negative 3 equals 6, again, I'd be trying to get x by itself. I would have to get rid of the division by negative 3. So I multiply by negative 3. But what I do to one side, I have to do to the other. The 3's will cancel. Anything divided by itself is 1. Remember, this for negative 3 we multiply by is over 1. And x will equal negative 18. Now we're going to take a look at some questions from your assignment. So these should be in the same order. These first ones bring up the idea of just the plain old coefficient. 4y is 4 times y, so that means to get rid of the 4, we would divide by 4, since there's times between the 4 and the y. The 4's would cancel. 24 divided by 4 is 6. Question 2. I need to get rid of division by 5. There's that fraction I want to eliminate. So what I'm going to do to get rid of division by 5 is multiply by 5. Keep in mind this is 5 over 1. It's up top. So there's a 5 above and below. There's a division between them. The 5's cancel. And I'm left with 7x equals 5 times 28 is 140. There's times between the 7 and the x. So I'm going to divide to get rid of that. 140 divided by 7 is 20. Number 3, we're getting the variable by itself. We have to eliminate the 8 to get the variable by itself. Because that's 8 times d, we're going to use the inverse operation and divide. 32 divided by 8 is 4. Question 4. I need to get rid of division by 2. The inverse of divide is multiply. So to get rid of division by 2, I'm going to multiply by 2. The 2's cancel. Anything divided by itself is 1, and 1a is a. A is by itself, and a is 10. If you know what you're doing, you can get going on your assignment, but I'm going to keep cruising through these so you have lots of examples. Question 5. I'm going to get rid of the 5. It's division by 5. I'll use the inverse. I'll multiply by 5. 5 is over 1. The 5's cancel. 3x is equal to 5 times 12 is 60. There's times now between the 3 and the x, so I'm going to divide by 3. And 60 divided by 3 is 20. Question 6. There's a number in front of that m. There's nothing there, so there's going to be a 1. This is negative 1 times m, so I'm going to divide by negative 1 to get rid of the multiplication. I'll divide, and m will be by itself now. M will be equal to negative 5. Number 7 is going to have a fraction answer, but I'm going to stick with the theme here. I don't like to work with fractions, even though I'm going to have a fraction answer. I can't do anything about that, but I can eliminate fractions right off, and the fraction will come out as my answer anyway. Watch. So I'm going to eliminate fractions. I want to get rid of this division by 3, so I'm going to multiply both sides by 3. This is leading into things we'll see later. So the 3's will cancel because it's 3 divided by 3, and I get negative 21x equals negative 2. Now there's certainly other ways to solve this than what I'm just doing. I'm just showing you a common theme of getting rid of fractions, and watch how these answers come out. There's times here, just like we've had. I'm going to get x by itself now. I'm going to divide both sides by negative 21. Notice how it's a negative divided by a negative, which is a positive, and 2 does not divide by 21. So that's our answer, 2 divided by 21. We would see if it reduced. If it reduced, there'd be a common factor above and below. This does not reduce. Now you might be able to turn it into a decimal, but there'd be no reason to do that if it was a messy decimal, one that went on and on. 2 divided by 21 is 0.095. 2380952. It repeats, but that's not very friendly. This fraction is much better. Just leave it as a reduced fraction. Let's try question 8. Question 8, I'm going to get rid of fractions. I'm going to multiply by 10. Now this is the first one that has that negative there. Now you can either multiply by 10, or if you wanted, you could multiply both sides by negative 10 and eliminate that negative at the same time. I'm just going to use 10 for now. Multiply by 10, the 10's cancel. Now don't forget the negative. That's negative 9x equals negative 810. Now I'm going to divide both sides by negative 9, and I'll go to my calculator. Notice it's a negative divided by a negative. 810 divided by 9 is 90. So x is 90. Here are your last examples, and these are easier than some of the others. But on number 9, I'm going to get rid of division by 7. I'll multiply by 7. Cancel. 5 times 7 is 35. That wasn't too bad. Number 10, it's another of those where I'm getting the x by itself. I need to get rid of the 11, get rid of the number by the variable, get rid of the coefficient. Divide both sides by 11. 55 divided by 11 is negative 5. Negative 5 equals x. Now if you want, you can turn that around, but they are the same thing. Either one of those is good. Number 11, I'm going to get rid of the fraction. I'm going to get rid of that division by 6. I'll multiply by 6 to do that. The 6's cancel. I get negative 5x equals 180. Now I've got times there between the negative 5 and the x, so I'm going to divide. Divide by negative 5. And 180 divided by negative 5 is negative 36. Last one, get the x by itself. Let's get rid of fractions. Let's multiply both sides by 5. Now a shortcut would be to multiply by -5, but I'm going to pretend I didn't notice that. I'll multiply both sides by 5 and cancel, and I get -15 equals -x. Now there's a 1 in front of that x, so it's a -1. I'm going to divide both sides by -1, and I get x is equal to, notice it's two negatives, -15 divided by -1 is +15. And my answer is 15. Remember, we're going to get the variable by itself, and to do that, we use the inverse operation.